firsts are still a tricky business indeed, but there was an origin of life within a not too long period of time, and soon there was something living there. It wasn't very interesting, and it couldn't really do anything of which God could see a point. But it gave God some ideas for some of the earlier planets he had messed up. When God returned to Earth a long while later, life on Earth was different than when he'd left it. There were creatures of sorts. They were not pretty to look at, God thought, so he began to prod. The creatures changed appearances and started to grow. They grew larger as God prodded more and more, and he found that he'd have to prod the vegetation too if it were to keep up. At this point, God was surprised to find something that did interest him. He named them carnivores.
It just sounded cool.
But the creatures grew very, very large, and so did the vegetation, and God grew annoyed. He seemed to always have to do something to make the planet advance faster in one way or another, and God grew tired of it, and God grew angry. He took a moment to look around, meaning to calm down. So, we'll give him points for trying. But what happened was that God saw a rather large belt of mattery orbs and fragments floating around in the star system. He grabbed one of a particular sort of matter which he had named rock, and he made it collide with his planet of rather large plants and creatures. God saw immediately that life was not thrilled about the rock, and somewhat less thrilled about being hit with it. He didn't care. Now God looked to his other planets to see if they might support life. The planets with no solid surface were still no fun, and none of them were at all compatible with the life that God had become accustomed to playing around with. The solid planets that God had not yet attempted to create life on were no good either. God found that the immense changes in temperature were simply too much for life to handle. Eventually, God gave in. He didn't feel like changing the orbits of the planets, or even going to another star. He began to think of other options. It took him quite a while, but at some point in time God succeeded in creating a non-physical portal to another plane of existence, attached to the planet Earth. What was most brilliant about this particular portal was that it was more two-way-like in its doorness than the portals one could otherwise be unfortunate enough to run into. God went through the portal and decided that this plane of existence should be his new home. God created a lot of semi-physical things.
For he had now mastered the whole matter thing.
That would entertain him. Okay. And it did entertain him for a while. But boredom is a rather sneaky thing, which tends to creep up on even the most creative of eternal beings. And God began to entertain himself with sillier things. He named this new plane of existence Paradise, as he thought it was a more dignified name than home. He gave himself an appearance so he could reveal himself to matter, which, as it turned out, wasn't impressed, as he had not given it a mind.